afternoon. My name is Paul Spadaro, and I'm president of the Magothy River Association. This afternoon, I'd like to talk to you about the Magothy River Water Monitoring Program. The Magothy River Association was formed in 1946, and in the early years, we kind of focused on land use and zoning issues. But in these early 60s, we began to notice the river slipping away in its health. The first thing we really began to notice was the disappearance of underwater plants. And then as we watched the rivers continue to slip away in the 80s and early 1990s, we formed a more river-wide approach to our water monitoring. We started off with just basically focusing on water clarity. But in 1992, Dr. Peter Bergstrom formalized the program into a combination of water visibility and using a instrumental approach, and we began that water monitoring program as a volunteer effort. And then over the years since 1993, one of the things that we have done is we expanded that monitoring sites, now 33 sites along the river. Dr. Sally Horner will explain a little bit more about how and what we actually measure.
All right, so one of the first measurements that we take when we do our water quality monitoring is Secchi disc depth. So the Secchi disc is that round disc with the black and white quarters on it. And it was actually originally invented by an Italian oceanographer who was out at sea, and he noticed that the water was different colors in different areas of the ocean, and he wanted to be able to document that in some way. So he tied a dinner plate to a rope and dropped it over the side of the ship, and ever since then, all over the world, people measure Secchi disc depth. We use it to tell us not only the color of the water, but also the clarity of the water. We're interested in seeing how deep into the water you can see the disc. We drop the disc over the water until it disappears, and then we bring it back until it just reappears. And that is the Secchi disc depth. And our lines are marked in tenth meter intervals, so we can see to the closest tenth of a meter how clear the water is by how deep we can see the disc. And what we're looking for is to have, ideally we would like to have Secchi disc depth of 1 meter. Because that is what the aquatic plants that are rooted in the shallow coastal area, they need about a 1 meter Secchi disc depth or water clarity in order to be able to grow. We have just had this probe in the water, and we have our readings now. These data are going to tell us about the water quality at the station. And we have a series of measurements here that you can see in that close-up view. The first one is temperature. We measure temperature in degrees centigrade. So that's going to control, as you may recall, temperature controls the amount of gas that can be in water. So temperature is an important parameter. Then we have our dissolved oxygen in milligrams per liter. So, of course, oxygen is produced by the green plants. So during the day, the algae and the rooted plants are going to be producing oxygen. And in the evening, it's a little known fact that plants are animals at night, and they take up the oxygen at night and release CO2. So the dissolved oxygen concentration is really important because most critters that live in the bay or the river require 5 milligrams per liter. For the fish and the oysters that live close to the bottom, that's the oxygen level that they need. So whenever we get a reading of greater than 5, we're happy. The next one on here is conductivity, SPC it says, which is specific conductivity. So it's calibrated for temperature. And this tells us the concentration of dissolved ions in the water. So around here, the dissolved ions are mostly going to be chloride and sodium, right, to make up sodium chloride. So it reads the conductivity. The method is the Wheatstone bridge. You might have learned about that in physics. That's how that is measured. And then from the conductivity, the meter calculates salinity, sodium chloride in parts per thousand. So that's the next reading that we have on here is salinity in parts per thousand. Now you might recall, just for comparison, the open ocean, when you go to the beach, the ocean is 35 parts per thousand. That's full strength seawater. And estuarine water, of course, is a combination of fresh water and salt water. So around here, we're getting about 5 to 15 parts per thousand salinity. So that's the brackish water that we find in the Magothy River and in the northern part of the bay. The last parameter on here is pH, which is 7.36 on here. So pH tells us what the algae is doing in the water. You may recall that as plants are carrying out photosynthesis, they're taking up CO2, and in the evening, they're releasing CO2 in respiration. So as plants take up CO2 from the water, they're taking up the acidic end of that buffering curve, and the pH will then go up. And it could go up to as high as 8 or even 10 on a really, on a day when there's a lot of sun and a lot of plant activity. And then in the evening, those same plants now are going to be releasing CO2 in their respiration. So as they release CO2 into the water, they're releasing acidity into the water, and the pH will go down. Well, the pH really helps us to understand when we have a high oxygen and a low pH, we know we have a real algal bloom going on.
We now take the information that all our volunteer monitors have given us, and Dr. Sally Horner will evaluate that, and at the end of the year, usually in monitoring year or the beginning of the new monitoring year, we have the annual Magothy River Index, and that is a presentation in which we can see if the health is improving or disapproving or remaining the same. Referring to the 2020 Magothy River Index that I'm showing right now, unfortunately, I have to say that the index had slipped from the 2019 report. We were trending upward, but in the last year, we really started to trend downward, and I'm a little discouraged about that. One of the things that we're doing this year is that we're stepping up. We're adding buying another monitor to help us with more readings in the river, and we are also buying another monitor, a turbidity meter, to measure sedimentation in the river. Just have to see how this monitoring season goes. I'm optimistic that maybe things are on the swing back up.